It was supposed to be a peaceful Saturday morning. My wife and I had just finished moving into our new HOA place we chose for the quiet, the view, and the freedom. But before we could even unpack our boxes, the drama started. Out of nowhere, this woman from down the street, someone we'd never even spoken to, stormed over in full HOA Karen mode. She demanded that my wife immediately sign into their homeowners association, even though we weren't legally required to. When my wife calmly refused, Karen got louder, more aggressive, and finally pulled out her phone to call the cops, thinking that would scare us into compliance. But what happened next completely flipped the script. As the squad car rolled up and the officers stepped out, Karen stood there smirking like she had won. That smug look didn't last long, because the moment the police saw my wife, they did something that stunned everyone standing there, including me. Their reaction wasn't anger, and it wasn't confusion, was respect. And the way they responded left Karen speechless and the entire neighborhood in shock. You won't believe what they did, or why it changed everything from that moment forward. The officers stood still for a moment. Then all three of them raised their hands in a sharp, respectful salute toward my wife. Karen's face went pale. She stuttered, trying to understand what was happening. One of the officers stepped forward and said, "Ma'am, welcome home." That one line carried so much weight, and I could see it shook Karen to her core. My wife didn't say a word. She just gave a small nod, calm and composed like always. The rest of the neighbors had started gathering on their porches, whispering and pointing, clearly confused by what they were witnessing. What Karen didn't know, what most people here didn't know, is that my wife served over a decade in the military, leading missions, earning honors, and saving lives. She never bragged about it. She never brought it up unless someone asked. She believed in humility, in service over show. But Karen didn't care about any of that. To her, it was all about power, control, and making people follow her rules. She thought calling the cops would force us to fall in line. She had no idea she was messing with someone who had already faced far tougher battles than a suburban power trip. And the real story was just getting started. Karen tried to laugh it off, but her voice cracked. "There must be some mistake," she said to the officers. "She's refusing to follow the HOA guidelines. That's against community policy." The lead officer glanced at my wife, then looked back at Karen. She's well within her rights. This neighborhood isn't under any mandatory HOA. It's optional. You could see the shift in Karen's face from smugness to confusion, then straight into anger. But she wasn't done. People like her never are. That afternoon, things escalated. Flyers started appearing on doorsteps around the block bold. Letters warning residents about new neighbors refusing to follow community standards. No names, but everyone knew who it was aimed at. Some neighbors began acting distant. A few even stared whenever we walked by. Karen had clearly activated her inner circle, using whispers and passive aggression like weapons. But my wife didn't flinch. She kept her head high, her routine steady, like none of it touched her. Meanwhile, I was watching it all build small. Signs of sabotage, subtle pressure from the HOA, and now even strange cars slowing down in front of our house. Something deeper was going on here. Something beyond one woman's obsession with rules. And we were about to find out just how far it would go. A few days later, the tension finally reached a boiling point. We woke up to find a bright orange notice taped to our front door. It wasn't from the city or any official department. It was from the HOA. It claimed we were in violation of neighborhood standards for things like the color of our mailbox, the height of our grass, even the angle of our garbage bins. Most of it was ridiculous, and none of it applied to non-members. But it was clear, this was no longer about rules. This was personal. That night, my wife sat quietly on the porch, eyes scanning the street like she was back on patrol. She sensed it too. This wasn't just Karen anymore. Someone was watching us. Someone wanted us to feel like outsiders. Just before midnight, we heard footsteps outside. I flicked on the porch light and caught a glimpse of a shadow slipping behind our hedges. We called the police, but they found nothing, no prints, no camera footage. Just a growing sense that we were being pushed, little by little, toward a breaking point. Meanwhile, Karen had called a special HOA meeting. We weren't invited, but we heard whispers of a vote one that could decide if we were fit to stay. What no one knew yet was that my wife had one last move left, and it would shake this entire neighborhood to its core. The day after the secret HOA meeting, a certified letter arrived at our door. Inside was a formal request demanding we appear before a so-called community review board to explain our refusal to join the HOA and respond to concerns about our fit within the neighborhood. It sounded like a bad joke, but it was real. Karen had rallied enough people to turn this into something official, or at least something that looked official. The goal was clear: push us out using pressure, embarrassment, and fear. But here's where things took a turn no one saw coming. That evening, a sleek black SUV pulled up in front of our house. A man in uniform stepped out, not a cop, not military, but from a federal agency. He saluted my wife and handed her a sealed envelope. The neighbors watched from their windows, phones in hand, trying to figure out what was happening. Karen stood on her lawn frozen, her mouth slightly open. The envelope wasn't about the HOA. It was a private invitation to a classified military ceremony, one that only a handful of veterans in the country ever receive. It wasn't just recognition. It was honor at the highest level. And Karen had no idea that her little crusade was now under a much bigger spotlight. The day of the so-called Coyote Community Review Board finally arrived. Karen had set it up in the neighborhood clubhouse like some kind of courtroom, complete with a table of HOA members and printed accusations. Neighbors filled the chairs, some curious, others just waiting for drama. My wife walked in calmly, wearing her service medals over a plain black blazer. She didn't say much, just handed the board a copy of federal housing laws that confirmed, once and for all, that we weren't bound to their HOA and couldn't be forced into it. Karen tried to interrupt, but before she could speak, the double doors opened. 2 uniformed military officers stepped inside. They didn't come for the HOA. They came for my wife. One stepped forward and announced that she was being honored at a private ceremony for classified operations overseas. The room went silent. Every person there turned to look at her with a new kind of respect, one that Karen had no control over. Her power faded instantly. But just when it seemed over, the twist hit. The officer handed Karen a letter. It was a formal complaint filed against her, not by us, but by another neighbor. Turns out, we weren't the first ones she had harassed. We were just the first who stood up to her. After that day, everything changed. Karen's influence crumbled as fast as it had grown. The formal complaint turned into an investigation, revealing she'd used intimidation tactics on multiple families over the years, especially newcomers who didn't know their rights. She quietly stepped down from the HOA board a week later, and the flyers, side glances, and late-night stunts all disappeared. It was like the whole neighborhood took a breath the moment she backed off. As for us, we stayed. We planted new trees in the yard, waved to the same neighbors who once looked through us, and finally began to enjoy the peace we came here for. My wife never rubbed any of it, and she just kept living the way she always had, strong and steady, without needing to prove a thing. The ceremony she was invited to stayed private, just like it should have. But word spread, and the respect she earned quietly echoed through every street in the community. The biggest lesson: sometimes the loudest voices aren't the strongest. Real strength doesn't shout, stands firm. And when you're doing the right thing, Even in silence, the truth has a way of speaking louder than anything else.